Three, two, one.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of GrokTALK, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, GrokTALK.com. We are your feared, extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio, microphone stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from GrokTALK.com.
GrokTALK.
Welcome back to Segment 2 of GrokTALK, brought to you by GrokTALK.com and the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. Don't forget you can check out this and past programs on Stitcher, iTunes, Spreaker, iHeart, TuneIn, Tumblr, YouTube, Ustream, Blip TV, and of course, GraniteGrok.com. We'd like to remind you also to check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Just look for Granite Grok. And don't forget you can donate to this program. We don't earn any money doing this. We do it for free, and you help support the cost of running the show, the phones, and all that good stuff. And we're happy to take your money to help pay for that. We don't get paid to do any of this. It all goes to equipment and software and monthly recurring bills. So
correct. And I'll read part of a sentence and we'll bring it up later, or talk about it as to who said it. The spine of a worm, the ethics of whores, and the integrity of pirates. This is somebody that talked about the GOP.
You don't have a headset on. Why are you talking? My God.
Okay, I'll give you, how accurate. And what I was going to say last time you cut me off, which plays right into this, is that you're playing music over me again, is that elephants never forget. What they never forget is they're afraid of mice.
All right, well, let's enough of that pithy banter stuff. Let's bring our guest on. Hal Shurtleff is the, I lost my note, Regional Field Director at the John Birch Society. Mr. Shurtleff, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Great to have you here. Are you in New England?
Actually, right now, I'm at a homeschool show in Rockland, Maine. The Maine Homeschool is a Maine annual conference, so having an information table here, and my relief didn't show up, my 10-year-old daughter, so I have to walk away from the table where it's a little quiet. But I'm ready to go. So.
All right, thanks for being on the show. So, Mike,
Sure.
You booked this guest. Let's turn it over to you.
Well, so the John Birch Society is a very conservative organization and strict constitutionalists, and they have long had a fear of managing to make the mess worse by attempting to modify the Constitution. And so, whenever there's a debate about a constitutional convention, you can count on the John Birch Society to make very cogent arguments as to why not. And it is, especially since that is a hot topic right now, with a lot of people, proposing various bills in various states to get us to a CONCON. I thought it was a highly appropriate time to have Hal provide the counter argument, and yes, we'll try and get one of our legislators on for the other side sometime soon. I believe Josh Moore is one of the pros. Hal, take it.
Well, thanks for having me on. And yes, in Article 5, I'm sure some of your listeners may not know the whole aspect of the Article 5. Article 5 of the Constitution, two means to amend the Constitution. One, of course, is the process where 2/3 of the U.S. House and Senate propose an amendment. It goes to the states. 3/4 of the states either say, no, you need 3/4 of the states to ratify it, or the second way is through something that we've never had, what they call a convention. It's been referred to as a constitutional convention for the past 40 years, but the last couple of years when an organization called Convention of States formed, now they call it a Convention of States. So whatever you call it, it's an Article 5 convention. And the folks on the other side, the conservatives, so there's people on both sides of the spectrum that have always opposed and supported. So it's not your typical left-right issue. There are people, but lately it's mainly people on the left and right pushing one. There's a little bit of token opposition from a couple of left-wing groups opposing it, but it's pretty much groups like the John Birch Society, Eagle Forum, and a few other groups that have popped up, and even Campaign for Liberty's come out against it. Gun Owners of America, with Larry Pratt, come out against it, many, many others. So the bottom line is you cannot control a convention. Once the convention is called, anything is on the table. That whole Constitution is on the chopping block, so to speak. The resolutions that may be introduced in different states may call for something specific, a balanced budget. The Convention of States, their resolution is rather open-ended when you read it. The Wolf Pack, which is the left-wing group pushing Article 5, their call is open-ended. They're trying to get an amendment that would curtail parts of the First Amendment dealing with corporations, and then many other things as well. So once a convention is called, again, there is the Constitution is on the chopping block. Now, we are told that 3/4 of the states, actually, in order to ratify, you need 3/4 of the states, either state legislators or, as Congress may decide, ratifying committees. So a lot of these legislators think that they'll pass a resolution, and if there's any amendments that we think are a little off the wall or unsound, there's no way that 3/4 of the states will ever pass them. So we have nothing to worry about. Well, states have done a lot of bad things. They passed bad amendments without a convention. They passed the 16th. They passed the 17th. They passed the 18th. They had to repeal the 18th with the 21st. And also, states have done some strange things as well without the help of an Article 5. Look at your Common Core. Now, the state legislators didn't vote for Common Core, but we're stuck with it in 46 states. And even these so-called red states, they're having a lot of trouble getting rid of it because a lot of these Republicans that are supposed to be conservative and all that are not getting rid of it. We have something called Agenda 21. And New Hampshire's up to its eyeballs in Agenda 21 through HUD and through the regional planning commissions. It was 2010, I think, that the New Hampshire House passed a bill against it. It died in the Senate. So here are some things that have been done without some bad, unsound things. Then you ask the question, well, what exactly is a bad amendment? Because, you and I, we might say, well, there are certain things that we know are bad, but that's a subjective term. And these folks are working awfully hard. I mean, I've never seen it's too bad these people who call themselves conservatives can't get excited about some of these other burning issues, but they are working hard. They think their amendments will pass. The Wolf Pack, the left-wing group, they're convinced that their agenda will pass. They wouldn't be spending so much money and time and effort if they thought that they would not get their amendments passed. So in New Hampshire had a number of calls for various reasons for an Article 5. The last time was like mid-'80s, had one for a balanced budget amendment. Now you say, why would you be against a balanced budget amendment? I mean, come on, you're conservative. Well, look at the bigger picture. Look at the fine print. A balanced budget amendment doesn't call for a constitutional budget. And the only way to get a balanced budget is to cut the size of government. And it's almost hypocritical that a lot of these state legislators that say, we want to get our power back from the federal government, are more than happy to take billions of dollars or billions of dollars from that same federal government. In fact, what was it, in December? They passed a discretionary bill to the tune of $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion, and your delegation voted for it, right? And I didn't see any resolution coming down from the New Hampshire House that urging their delegates to oppose this. You see, so these people seem to like big government. So how can you have a balanced budget without cutting the size of government? The only other option is to raise taxes.
And that's exactly why I personally object to a balanced budget amendment of any type, because unless it's very, very specific that it shall be achieved by cuts, not by additional spending, except for wartime, maybe. There's no reason. There's no reason to have an amendment which basically forces you to go and load your profligacy on the backs of the taxpayers.
And another thing too is not just higher, but a VAT tax. That's something that is discussed. So, and because we have a Federal Reserve Bank that just prints money as it's needed, your balanced budget amendment won't address that. And it's funny, they'll tell us that Congress is so horrible and corrupt, but they expect the same corrupt, horrible people to do the right thing when this balanced budget amendment gets passed, which to me is kind of like a little unsound here. So in New Hampshire, let me give you sort of what's happening in New Hampshire. So 2010, after 20 years of efforts, our organization and a few others were able to get all of New Hampshire's calls rescinded. So it was a clean slate. There were no calls. 2012, we beat back a couple of attempts. Jordan Ullery was the man pushing this mainly through a group called ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, which is I use the term conservative in quotation marks, but it's a group that it's sort of a legislation machine. It's a nationwide lobbyist group. They've got about 2,000 elected officials, state level, that belong. And they've done some sound things over the years, but they've done some unsound things, including being a big supporter of an Article 5 convention. They like the idea of Obama's free trade agenda, too, and some other things that are not so good. Anyway, Jordan was able to get it through after we beat it back a couple of times, a call in 2012. So right now there is one live call for an Article 5 convention. Last year, the Wolfpack, this is the group that was started by the man who created the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, a so-called progressive. And the Young Turks, by the way, is part of George Soros' media consortium. So we don't suggest that the Wolfpack is getting money directly from George Soros, but the man who founded the group is getting money from George Soros. Well, Timothy Smith from Manchester submitted the resolution, and we testified against it and it was shot down by a Democrat majority. They just tabled it. They want nothing to do with it. It expedient to legislate at the committee hearings and it was tabled and they didn't go to a full vote. It was passed a few weeks ago by a Republican majority. 84 Republicans voted for this thing, something that was rejected last year. Pretty much the same resolution. So there's some kind of bipolarism going on at the State House. It's kind of it's called HCR2. It hasn't passed the Senate yet. They haven't held hearings on that, and we're waiting, to get the dates if they are going to hear.
Right. So Hal, as it happens, we have Max Abramson with us, who's on the get me straight here, legislative affairs.
No, Jasper still has not assigned me to a committee yet.
But you're in the House and you've got first-hand knowledge of some of the proponents, I would guess.
Right. Well, and both Republicans and Democrats are split on I think there are 5, HCR 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all calling for different types of constitutional conventions, and HCR 1 rescinds all calls for a constitutional convention, which didn't pass.
No, they killed that. And in fact, the write-up the committee gave was not based on right information. I saw the committee report, and they said there's no need to pass this because we haven't had a call since 1988. Well, they had a call in 2012. So I'm wondering if a lot of people who read the report, voted against it based on this inaccurate information.
Unfortunately, most of our state reps are not even following the committee's recommendations anymore. They're following whatever leadership tells them to do. They might be following the gold standard, which is a constitutional liberty-leaning group called NHLA. They might be following the business group's recommendations, but there are only about 80 to 100 state representatives who are even following the committee's recommendations. Out of 400 reps, I don't think very many are following committee recommendations anymore.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the word we have is that the speaker doesn't like resolutions, and in general, resolutions aren't too looked upon. But this is a unique situation. This isn't just a resolution honoring, some New Hampshire resident, but it's a resolution that has teeth. Most resolutions don't have teeth. It expresses a sense of the House or the Senate, but this one has teeth.
Well, Hal, we're going to take a 60-second break, and just before we go, I'm going to say the Republican Speaker of the House doesn't care much for Republicans, actually. So,
I know that. I know that.
which is why the real Republican leadership is trying very hard to hold together a more conservative caucus.
Okay, hang on a second. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're going to play a little music once I press the right buttons, and we'll be back after this.
This is the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Hi, this is Rich Gerard, host of Gerard at Large in the Morning, the Manchester area's only locally owned, locally operated, focused, and interested, riveting radio show, heard live every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on 90.7 FM WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio, and available 24/7 live or archived at gerardatlarge.com. Be sure to tune in.
All right, we are back. This is Grok Talk. I'm Steve McDonald here with Skip Murphy. Mike Rogers, Max Abramson is in the room, and our guest is Hal Shurtleff from the John Birch Society. You wanted to make a comment there, Matt?
I brought this up in front of Legislative Affairs, in front of, actually, I think 2 or 3 different committees so far. It doesn't matter whether you have an Article 5 convention or not. Congress can bypass that convention, and they can bypass the state legislatures. There's a provision in Article 5 where they can just recommend something and send it on down. Now, what they did with the 21st Amendment was they didn't go to the state legislatures at all. They chose to bypass them, and they used state ratifying conventions. So this whole discussion about whether or not to have a national Article 5 convention, I think, it's almost a moot point because they don't need us. They don't need the legislatures. They can go right past us. They can call state ratifying conventions, and without legislation, they can just say, well, you get 3 statewide elected delegates, and they can pass anything they want.
What do you think?
That's possible. Not only that, but Congress, right now there are no laws governing an Article 5 convention. There's been attempts over the years. I'm not talking about the federal level, and even at state levels. But there's been attempts. The last attempt, I think, was in 1979, where Orrin Hatch had hearings, and I've got the 1,300-page report. And the bills that they submitted were passed in the Senate but didn't go to the House. At that point, we were about 2 states away from a convention. So they were obviously, hey, we need some guidelines here. We don't know we don't have no guidelines currently. And one of the there's been 41 bills that have been introduced over the years that would that any amendments coming out of convention would be a 7 years to pass, like they did with the Equal Rights Amendment and I think a few others. Also, though, they're advocating that the members, the delegates to the convention would be based on electoral college votes. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a good chance. The Wolfpack people are advocating democracy. So that means New Hampshire will get 4 delegates, California gets 52 or 53, and so forth. So the small states, the large states with small populations, will have very little voice at this if they decide to do it that way. And according to Judge Bork and others, and Judge Bork was a pretty top legal mind in the country in his time. He said that even if they pass laws, a convention can overrule them, and he said, how would they be able to enforce these laws? So that's just so much uncharted water, uncharted territory here when it comes to an Article 5. And yes, we understand that it is part of the Constitution, but we also have to realize that our founders did not want the amending process to be easy. Could you imagine if they made it a simple majority? There would be 100 amendments, and we would have amended our Constitution out of existence. So they made it a difficult thing, and they didn't say that states had to use it. They said this was a means they may use, and they expected debate. They didn't say that we should have one every 5 years or every 10 years or whenever we thought that things were getting out of hand. But we do have other things at our disposal. We have the 10th Amendment. And how do you enforce the 10th Amendment? It's got to be done by the states. Thomas Jefferson, he said nullification is the right remedy. So, and New Hampshire nullified the Real ID Act. In fact, I think they set they provided leadership for the rest of the country in a number of states that said, hey, we're not complying with it. Some states have, but some states haven't. They nullified the fugitive slave laws back in the 1850s and such. And there's probably been other examples. I can't think of any off the top of my head. So that's something that will, I think, the right remedy. And they say that the elections are a waste of time, that we've tried to get the right people in Congress. Well, I think that if we didn't do what we've done, things would be a heck of a lot worse. there are some good people in Congress, that there are some bad people, there's some good people doing bad things, but how can we not get involved with that process? And if we expect people to uphold amendments, either new ones or old ones, for the Constitution, we better do our best to get people down there that are sound and hold them accountable. And that's the sad thing, is once they get elected, we don't seem to hold them accountable. And I would say that the state house, the state legislators should be instructing them how to vote. Now, they don't have to vote according to what the legislator does, but they should be paying a bigger hand. You know, for years, when this issue, very few people cared about this issue up to a couple of years ago. I mean, there was a small group passionate in one way or the other. But most people were indifferent to this thing. And a lot of them have waken up, and they say, good. And they say, well, this is the only solution we have. Well, it's not the only solution. And I contend that the solution would be no solution. It would be worse.
So we passed a bill called HB 148, which in theory would have restricted the powers of delegates and what they could and couldn't vote for. Again, one of the issues that I brought up in committee was once New Hampshire's jurisdiction only deals with where your feet are. As long as your feet are on New Hampshire soil, the state legislature has jurisdiction. As soon as you go to Chicago or San Francisco or Washington, D.C. or wherever they're going to have the national convention, we have no jurisdiction. So whatever statutes have been put in place under HB 148 would have no enforcement. And even if these delegates came back having completely broken their oaths, we'd have, unless you can go after them on perjury charges, you'd have absolutely no enforcement whatsoever. They were talking about taking the occupational licenses if they violated their oath of office.
Well, yes, I know that was a way. No, that was that voted on at the. It went through committee, but was that voted on at the General Assembly?
I can't remember. It was one of the first votes that we had. I can't remember if they tabled it or not.
Dan Itza and my good friend Paul and Bretson, although Paul's against an Article 5, but I think that thing is dead on arrival. You're correct. How can you enforce something, a crime that's committed outside of the state? And then what happens if they give they give themselves immunity? And Article 6 of the Constitution says the highest law of the land, so that can be nullified. That can be just overturned very easily. And so we think, well, we've got a safeguard here. Not only that, but all 50 states have to have something similar, right? Because New Hampshire passes it, so our delegates do what they're supposed to. And some people think that they call this a convention of the states, but it's really a convention of the people, because the delegates don't represent the state houses. They represent the state of New Hampshire, the people of New Hampshire, not the legislatures of New Hampshire. So that's another take on it. In fact, there's been numerous state conventions over the years, and there was an interesting book that came out, I think, in the early 1900s that talked about some of the problems that these conventions had. And there was one, New York State had a convention in 1802, I think. And one of the delegates basically said, we are the people. We are the sovereign people in New York. And they had a lot of power, you see. So it's not that these delegates are going to go down and do one thing or two things or three things, or we're just going to submit a balanced budget. It's a deliberative body. Even Rob Nadelson had wrote that it's a deliberative body. So they get down there. Yeah, maybe the state legislature says we want to have this amendment or that amendment, but we're not bound by that.
Sorry, I wrote early on about this. I said the minute you appoint and or elect these people, they are politicians and should be treated like politicians. They can be bought, they will be sold, things will go bad.
And they're also lame duck too. At least when it comes to being delegates, because once it's over, it's over.
That's right.
Here's another problem. If we have these people get elected as delegates to the national Article 5 convention, do they then come back to our states and suddenly become delegates to our state ratifying conventions?
Well, that's true. That could happen. That could happen.
Is there going to be an election process? Is there going to be a way for the American people to look at some terrible Death Star amendment that comes down? Is there going to be an intervening election where we elect members of our state ratifying convention, or are you just going to have the same group of people who are at the Article 5 national convention coming back and saying, yes, this is what we agreed on, this is what you're getting, with no intervening vote?
Isn't D.C. the Death Star already? even without Darth Vader as vice president?
That is true.
Well, Congress right now could come up with an amendment saying, well, we're oligarchs for life and we're nobility, and they could amend the Constitution, and they could choose to bypass the state legislatures, and they could simply have state ratifying conventions just like they did with the 21st Amendment, and as I've said, bypass the state legislatures and just effectively go 3 delegates per state. Those would be $1 million campaigns. They'd have enough states to ratify whatever they wanted, so they wouldn't even need an Article 5 convention.
So, Hal, where do you think? How do you think this is going to go?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. We look around the country, and we're looking at states that they're passing in some committees, getting shot down in others. So it's really. We may be about 8 states away from one, although Congress may not acknowledge any calls over 7 years. There was a study from the Congressional Research Services in April of last year. You can find it online. Congressional Research Services Article 5 Convention. And that's one of the things and it was, the guy who wrote it, I don't think it was a question of being biased, he was just the pros and cons, but he said that Congress always believes it has a lot of control over one. And then that's some of the things he pointed out, that any amendment, any resolution that's not worded identically, in fact, the New Hampshire resolution for an Article 5 convention passed in 2012 is worded differently from many others. And there's a lot of these resolutions that go back to the 70s and 80s, so it's hard to say. So I think they're doing some kind of count. I've been reading about they're trying to get their handle on what calls are valid, and a lot of states had rescinded their calls, and so those old calls may not be valid anyway. So, but I'm acting as if we're 8 states away. I think that's the safe thing to think. We're 8 states away from one, and we have to be as diligent as we can. If any of your listeners are interested in helping us out or learning more about the subject, jbs.org is the website. In New Hampshire, we have a Facebook, New Hampshire Friends of the John Birch Society. We also have a Facebook page called Stop the Constitutional Convention, where we have a lot of updated information from around the country.
And you specifically have a paper refuting Mark Levin's call for his liberty amendments.
Yes, we have a lot. We just wrote one recently, an article recently, what the battle going on in Texas. Yeah, we have an article, it was about 4-6 pages, Levin's risky proposal that was published sort of in the wake of his book. His book was published summer of 2012. So if you go to thenewamerican.com and just put in Article 5 Convention, you'll find some going back to the 80s, some articles on the subject. Probably more information than you need to know on the subject, but lots of good information there. And I know, in fact, I'm at the homeschool show, and there's a gentleman who's a wonderful guy, Bill Clark. He ran for Congress, he ran for the Senate, ran for governor, and he's in favor of one. But we had a very good conversation, and we shook hands, and we have the highest regard for each other. Unfortunately, that's not with a lot of folks. There's been a lot of nastiness going on, and it's a sad thing because there are a lot of these folks that when I learn who they are, I say, gee, I agree with everything you stand for except for this, But I think people can have strong views and disagree without hating each other, without resorting to mudslinging.
All right. Well, Hal, we're out of time. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, and good luck.
For having me on.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
All right. We're coming up next with, I believe, Betsy McCoy. Is that correct? All right. So stay tuned. We're going to have a chat with her. Haven't had her on for a while. Good to have her back. This is GrokTALK.